Hey everybody, how's it going? And like that, it's Wednesday one more time, and this is the energy drink that I'm having today. We're doing the Red Bull, um, the red edition, the sugar-free edition. Last time I had it, it was the regular edition, which, my bad. I usually get the sugar-free, but you know what? Whatever. It was still good. What I wanted to talk about today is something that wasn't really aware of too much until I started to hear it more. And it's basically the question of, so basically Deathcore is back. I mean, it's cool, like I was listening to just like a random playlist on might have been, yeah, I think Apple Music, after I deleted my Spotify, which if you haven't, definitely consider that. But in any case, I was just on a random Deathcore playlist, and obviously they have the tried and true, right? Suicide Silence, Artist Murder, All Shall Perish, Suffocate, As Blood Runs Black. So all the classics that I grew up with back in the day, like I was in the epicenter of that when stuff was new. But then I started hearing bands that I never heard before. Specifically one band in particular that I was like, damn, this is new. And I think the band's name is Revenant, if I remember correctly. And I was hearing it and I couldn't believe just how well they are able to capture that sound of like 2000, I would say 4 to like 2008 ish, in terms of like that deathcore sound. And I was just so surprised and like so like taken aback. Like I couldn't believe it, to be quite honest, because, and I'll tell you a little backstory. Back when I was in high school, and deathcore and metalcore and like some of the other hardcore bands were very popular during that time. It was obviously new, right? If you were around the MySpace deathcore era, everything was new, and like the sounds were very different from like death metal and the more classic metal stuff that was going on. They were having their moment, the deathcore and metalcore bands. So I was there when those bands were like putting out some of their best stuff. Like, for example, Suicide Silence had just put out The Cleansing. As Blood Runs Black had just put out their first album. And if everybody remembers, or anybody remembers the band, what were they called? I think they were called something Kraken. I forget what the band is called. If anybody remembers, Release the Kraken or something to that effect. I don't remember, but it has something to do with that. And they were a band from Mexico. They put out some amazing deathcore stuff that, to my like young self that was listening to more like punk and like old school hardcore and stuff like that, thrash metal, to me it was like a completely new sound that I didn't know could exist. And I remember the specific moment that I listened to the first deathcore song ever, which for me was Suicide Silence Unanswered, off of their The Cleansing album. A guy I knew in one of my classes, we were just talking, about music and what we were into, blah, blah, blah. And then he's like, oh, you should listen to my favorite band. It's called Suicide Silence. And I was thinking, like, that's a crazy name, first and foremost, right? And I was like, oh, okay, I'll check it out. So I looked it up, and when I first heard that like flam, on the drums for that song, if I was like, whoa, like what the hell is this? Like, this could be made, and like I couldn't believe it, right? So it gave me that feeling of just like, this is gonna be what I'm gonna be obsessed with for the next couple of years. And yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I started my whole journey of finding bands like Oceano and like the other bands I mentioned. But this is where things take a turn, because that was around 2000, I want to say 8 or 9, right? So by 2011, which I expanded my whole music repertoire by that point, not just deathcore, but like technical death metal, like the Faceless, for example, the Harp Machine, if you guys remember that one. By 2000, I would say 11-ish, 12, because I graduated in 2012, deathcore started to get boring. And I'm gonna put it on one band. I know people love this band, you know, and they're not bad, but I think they have a lot to quote unquote blame for, because the band is Periphery, and once they came out, they had already been out for a minute, right, during this whole time that I'm talking about, but I feel like by 2011, 2010 to like 2012, they really blew up in like the metal scene, and their sound, they're like very genty sound, which I love. Meshuggah, right, the pioneers of that sound, they're still the OGs and the best in my opinion. But when Periphery started to like just churn out that sound, every band wanted to sound like that. Every band I remember like was just, they had their gent album, right? And it just became boring. I'll be honest. It was just something I didn't care for at that point. You know, I was still listening to the Faceless, listening to a lot of technical death metal bands like Necrophagist and all this cool stuff, right? But my attention kind of started veering off like deathcore, because it just started getting boring. And I feel like for a lot of people, that was kind of where they started to not listen to it as much, because it became formulaic and very plastic and very just kind of boring, right? So I started listening to a lot of post-hardcore, a lot more mathcore, a lot more electronic music. I got really into jungle, drum and bass, blah blah blah. So fast forward till now, right, where I'm kind of having my own personal revival with old, you know, music from my youth, especially like deathcore and stuff like that, trying to revisit that. And then I'm on a random playlist and I hear this like crazy, just like out of left field sound, which really reminds me of that era when I was listening to that playlist, specifically the band Revenant, right? Shout out to them. They're doing it right. Like, that is the sound. They have encapsulated the sound of the mid 2000s like perfectly, you know, and they have for sure made it a bit more polished, right? Because if you remember back in the days, that MySpace deathcore era, the production values weren't that great, but that was part of the charm, right? It's part of the charm. But Revenant have made it to where it's polished enough to where it sounds clear, it sounds great, but it's not overly produced, which was another huge downfall for a lot of music in the early 2010s. It just went way over the board with, you know, polishing their sound to where the edge is just kind of like cut off, right? So yeah, all these new bands that come out are amazing. I can't recall some of the names, to be quite honest, because they tend to be kind of long, but Revenant just stands out because it's super clear. It's one you know, word. I think another band that's pretty cool, let me see if I say this right, you can correct me in the comments, I think it's called Thus Spoke Zarathustra or something to that effect. That's another band that I butcher the name of, but it's really great too, really harkening back to that sound like I was mentioning. So this new crop of bands, obviously a lot of them are probably like Gen Z, you know, people. They're doing it right. That is the correct way to pay homage and create your own sound with a lot of those ingredients that made the music great back in the day, right? So if you haven't listened to them, check out Revenant. Check out a lot of the newer deathcore bands and metalcore bands too. They're doing amazing. Shout out to them. And yeah, I'm so glad that this new revival is actually putting out some great stuff, because we needed that in the scene, and deathcore scene and metalcore scene, right? So it's making me inspired to make music like that too again, right? And to experiment with it again, which, you know, that's cool too. You know, that's cool too. But let me know, have you listened to some of these bands? What do you think? Give me some recommendations. I want to know what is out there that I could listen to that has that cool sound. You know what I mean? Because I want to get back into it and really like see what's going on, right? But as always, share, like, subscribe. It helps out the channel. And I'll see you all in the next one.